Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining. And thank you for Zoe for arranging all of this and for allowing us to step into this space. So as we mentioned, we work for the Scalabrini Center of Cape Town. So we assist our majority of our clients that we assist are refugees and asylum seekers, mostly from Central African countries like the DRC. And over the years, we've seen the demographic get younger and younger. So we've also had to, I think, learn a lot of new things and new approaches to supporting our clients. So today, we're just going to speak about the 4 different topics. So the first one is educational access and rights. So in a nutshell, what rights do foreign nationals have for tertiary education? And Kutle will also speak a bit about basic education rights. Then we have the requirements for accessing tertiary application, just mostly making sure that the learners have the correct documentation at the time of application. And then we'll speak about some of the common challenges that we've come across and how to support the learners in overcoming those. And then lastly, we'll talk about the support needs that foreign national learners might have that may differ from South African learners that you've dealt with, right? So I'm going to hand over to Kutle to just go over some definitions, just to clarify some of the things that we'll be talking about.
All right. Hi, everyone. Can you please confirm if you can hear me? Okay. Thank you again for this invitation. It is an honor to be here and to share information and be of assistance as best as we can. I'm just going to provide you with definitions before we progress, so people know which category they fall under. Okay, so according to the refugee law of South Africa, a refugee is a person who has fled their own country because they are at risk of serious human rights violation and persecution in their country of origin. And then there are asylum seekers, but there are 2 types of asylum seekers. There's a documented asylum seeker and an undocumented one. You are recognized as an asylum seeker if you leave your country because of fear of persecution before even getting documentation. And then as a documented asylum seeker in South Africa, it's when you get your asylum seeker permit, which is a Section 22. A refugee is someone who has a Section 24. So how this works is that when you enter the country, you are an asylum seeker. You're fleeing from your country. You are a recognized asylum seeker. And then you become an asylum seeker holder when you get the permit. After a number of years, then you can be recognized as a refugee should there still be issues of persecution in your country of origin. So it's a triangle in some way. And then people on the move, it's a collective term for displaced populations, including border migrants, refugees, asylum seekers, as well as other vulnerable migrant populations.
Sorry, maybe I'll just step in and say that so people on the move is a term that's quite new. It's been introduced by the UNHCR and the International Labour Organization, the ILO. And the term is to bring some humanism to the terms that we use, because the term refugee and asylum seeker can have a lot of stigma and prejudice and things attached to it. So we're trying to move away from that, and also to recognize that people move for different reasons. In the most recent years, and I'm sure in the years that are coming ahead, we've seen more people move because of work-related reasons, but also because of climate change, right?
All right. And then we have 1.5 and second generation migrants. These are the people that were born in South Africa, but were born into at least one migrant parent, asylum seeker, refugee holder. And they are between the age of 6 and 12, and they earned label 1.5 generation because they spent their formative years assimilating and engaging and socializing in the new country. This group is often caught between a legal and social uncertainty. They struggle to access documentation, which limits their ability to go to school, employment, as well as pursue higher education. Even though they are born and raised in South Africa, they face discrimination, exclusion, and barriers to full integration into the new country. They experience they experience disrupted schooling due to financial constraints, unstable living conditions, and systematic barriers within the education system.
And then just to add, I think if there's any social workers in this presentation, they'll also recognize that, especially amongst second generation migrants, we see a lot of identity issues there. So a lot of the children, even though they came here when they were young or they grew up here, they've got the cultural ties to their home country because of their parents. And also because of their documentation, they might not be fully accepted in the classrooms or in schools. So they develop this identity crisis about their identity and their heritage. So that is something to be aware of as well, especially once they step into tertiary education. That can compound some of those feelings for them.
Okay. And then before we head into accessing higher education, I want to speak a bit about basic education. So in South Africa, the Department of Education states that all individuals, South African or foreign nationals that are undocumented, have the right to basic education. Now, this is you without a birth certificate, even without a passport, without anything, you do have the right to access basic education. Because there are also South African children who don't have any documentation at all. Now you can go from crèche or grade 1 up into matric. You can write your final exams and you get your marks back without having any documentation. Now, when we're moving into higher education, you're asking what rights do people on the move? I'm going to use that term than foreign nationals. What right do people on the move have in accessing education in South Africa? So if you're a permanent resident holder, you have the same right and access as a citizen, and you can access education, and you can also apply for government funding such as ANSWERS. But if you are a refugee holder and an asylum seeker permit holder, you can't access ANSWERS. Refugees and asylum seekers have the right to study at a university without a documentation, of course, and at any TVET college, but unfortunately, and they do not need a study visa to enroll in higher education, because when you get a permit, they give you the right to study, the right to work, or right to work and study.
And just to mention that the access to government funding has been challenged before. Previously, it wasn't open to permanent residents. Unfortunately, when that was extended towards permanent residents, they didn't extend it further towards refugees or asylum seekers. So currently, it's only permanent residence holders and South African citizens that can apply for NSFAS.
Okay, so when you're applying for a university, there's obviously documentation that you have to put together to support your application. So the documentation that people on the move need are a valid asylum seeker or refugee permit, a study visa, which, as I said, if you're an asylum seeker holder or a refugee permit holder, you don't need a study visa, a birth certificate, whether unabridged or abridged, an abridged certificate may be insufficient. Proof of permanent residency if you are a permanent residency holder, as well as academic transcripts and certificates and supporting letters from schools, NGOs. If you have a case with social workers, I know that they assist in cases like that. The requirements are as follows. If you have Section 22, which is an asylum seeker permit or refugee permit, and Section 24, they must be valid at the time of applying. Because if it is not valid and then you cannot submit your application, it is crucial that the permit is kept up to date and renewed timelessly to avoid any complications with the application, registration, or the enrollment process. If the permit is close to expiring, it is important that people apply for a renewal well before the expiry date. However, it has to be 14 days before the expiry date. That's the direction we've received from Home Affairs. If the permit has already expired, it may result in delays or rejection from the university because they do require a proof of legal valid status in the country. While they're awaiting renewal, learners are typically issued a renewal slip or put in confirmation by Home Affairs. This slip should be submitted along with other supporting documents to the tertiary institution to demonstrate that they are in the process of renewing their status. However, the renewal slip or appointment confirmation slip is not always something that they receive. We've seen that right now, people that are applying for extension, they get maybe an automated email, because this was when you could renew in the office or you get your renewal slip. Now it's online. The only feedback they get is a renewal slip, automated email. Sometimes currently now there are no application for new asylum seeker permits or in-person renewals. So they don't give you a physical copy, it's only via email when you apply for extension. People with the study visas, as I said, those who are not on asylum or refugees, and do not have a permanent residence or Zambian citizenship, they are expected or required to have a study visa. Study visas are needed prior to, you apply for the visa prior to entering the country. Learners should begin the process months before the academic year. Study visas are usually granted for the duration of the course, whether that is 3 years, 4 years, and you can only work 20 hours and you cannot work full time. And your permanent study visa should not expire because you are going to face overstay, which will result in a ban in the country. It is only in a few cases where you only get a penalty, but in most cases you get a 5-year ban. And with regards to study visas, just to add, it would be better if you speak to an immigration consultant, because here at Scalabrini, especially specifically in intake, we deal with refugee law, and study visas are mainly immigration law. So sometimes we only give just entry-level information. It's always best to consult with an immigration consultant. Study visas, if your institution changes or if you enroll in a different course, you can still use the same visa that you were using. If a learner changes institutions or enrolls in a different course than the one stated in the original study visa application, your current visa becomes invalid because they do write the institution on your visa. The learner has to apply for a new visa reflecting the institution and how long you're going to be there for and what you're going to be studying. This application, as I said, must be made from the country of origin, so you can't apply if you're already in the country. And when it comes to the abridged and unabridged certificate, the abridged certificate only details, basic details, your name, date of birth, and place of birth, and does not include your parents. The unabridged is more long form where you can include where your parents are included in the birth certificates. And this was only issued from March 2013, and mostly it is birth certificates that are for children born to refugees and asylum seekers. The university application and scholarship, certificate tertiary institutions and scholarships bodies do not differentiate between the two types, unabridged, abridged, asylum seeker, refugee. However, if you are an international applicant, you are required to submit an unabridged birth certificate with your parents' name to verify your age, your identity, your citizenship. Okay. Now, when accessing higher education in the country, it does prove to be a challenge for people on the move, and one of which is the expired documentation, because prior to 2020, before COVID, documentations were being renewed at the refugee office. Now they moved to an online system, the email, which is asms.extensions@dj.gov, which you have to submit your extension 14 days before. Now, the issue with this is that there is one email address for all asylum seekers in the country and all refugee holders in the country, which are a lot of people. And now the email is automated. So people may experience backlog up to 2 months without renewal. And we've seen clients come in and they say, I applied 6 months ago, I still haven't gotten my renewal, which is why people need to start the application process months before. And then another challenge that we have seen is that of undocumented learners. These are learners who cannot access higher education, but can complete basic education. Unfortunately, having a birth certificate is not sufficient as an ID, because Section 22, asylum seeker permit, and Section 24, refugee holder permit, valid ones at that, are a requirement. These applies for children born here and are yet to apply for citizenship. Because if you are born in the country, you can apply for citizenship when you're 18, but it can only be when you're 18 years old and not before that. Then if you finish matric at 18, you're going to have to wait until you finish, until your citizenship you receive your citizenship. Now that takes up to 2 years. So then after that, it means you are at home waiting for your citizenship, which is why it's important for parents to join the children in their file, because many parents believe that there's misinformation that when you join your child into your file and they are born in the country, they're not going to get citizenship, which is untrue. So children need to be joined into their parents' files so that by the time that they go to university, they have a documentation and are not waiting at home for citizenship. An alternative to that, if you weren't joined into your parents' file, is to apply for a study visa, but study visas are only applied for in your country of origin, and many of the children don't have passports from back home because they were born in the country. And then one major issue is that of separated and unaccompanied minors. If your parents came into the country when you were young and they left you in the country, you were in a shelter in your home, you are completely undocumented and have no form of documentation at all, even from your country of origin. You can apply for a visa, but then that requires you to have a passport from your country of origin, which many of the children don't have. And they are often forced to drop out because they cannot access higher education. And now they also lose legal protection as soon as they turn 18, because they then become adults, which in most cases, it is sort of a dead end for them. But there are alternative situations to try and speak about.
Sure. So, thank you, Guthrie. So before we move into the support needs, are there any questions about the legal side of refugees and asylum seekers accessing tertiary education?
Ryan, I just have one around when you say associating the file with the parent, like how easy is that to do? Where do you do that practically? Yeah, that would help.
Guthrie, do you want to answer?
This asking about getting the child in the mother's file, in the
Yes.
parents' file. Okay, so family joining is done at your nearest refugee office. You take, as the parent, the primary holder of the file, you take your valid documentation, you take any documentation that you have of the child. So if the child was born here, you can take the child and a birth certificate in a card and you submit it at Home Affairs, then you're gonna go get called back for an interview with the child. That also takes quite long, about a year itself, if the child was not born here. Now, when you enter into the border, they ask you of your dependents. So you have to have named the child in your file and say, I have a child named A, B, and C, so that when you go to Home Affairs eventually and due to family joining, they know that you mentioned that you already had a child named X. But with children that are not born in the country, they do require you to do a DNA test, but you don't do the DNA test on your own. I mean, prior to applying for family joining, when they call you, they're gonna inform you that they require DNA testing. So they just have to take the documentation and drop it off at Home Affairs, and then they're gonna call you back.
Great, thank you. It's helpful. I don't think there's any other questions. No hands up. Oh, any
Sure.
chat yet? But yeah, do pop your questions into the chat or raise a hand if you've got anything to ask. But yeah, I assume it's because you're being very thorough. Thanks, guys.
Okay. So just moving on to the targeted support needs. So I'm sure this is a lot of the support needs are things that you see in every learner that you support. But with refugees and asylum seekers, there's a lot of compounding factors and also the issue of the documentation that plays a part. So we're just going to go over some of them. So the first one that's very common in South Africa as a whole is digital and computer literacy. So many of the refugees and asylum seekers come from learning institutions that are under-resourced school environments. They might have studied in their country of origin and come here in later years, and they might not have or be that computer savvy. And once they enroll in tertiary education, the schools don't do very much to support the learner initially, right? So unless the learner goes through a bridging course or an extended degree program, they're expected to be able to navigate and use the computer, have access to internet on the outset. So the best thing would be to give the learner access to these resources. So that might be just instructing the learner about where to access computer facilities. That could be the libraries or NGOs. And then in the Western Cape, there's also quite a large network of public and free Wi-Fi services that are in schools, in hospitals, in clinics, at libraries as well. But I think the biggest part is just to identify this in the learner and really have a serious conversation about upskilling themselves, about focusing on digital and computer proficiency. Because it will become a hurdle for them once they go into tertiary education. The second one that we see quite often is English proficiency, in particular academic English. So the second generation migrants who grew up in South Africa typically do have good English. But when it comes to academic English, that's where the bridge or formal writing, that's where we see a big gap, right? So it might be useful. There are quite a lot of online resources through MOOCs, for example, Udemy, edX, Coursera, where someone can upskill and learn academic English. There are also certain institutions that offer short learning programs. And this might be something to talk to the learner about, to perform one of these first before they enroll in their degree. The idea behind talking to the learner seriously about this English and digital literacy is to have them better prepared for when they go into tertiary education. Because if they do step into tertiary education and they make it through the application phase, they make it through the first few weeks, once they start working on their assignments and they have these additional challenges for academic English, for digital literacy that they have to learn on the spot, that puts a lot of strain on them, and it can be demotivating to them as well. So we try and address this early on. Usually at grade 11 level, we suggest starting to have these conversations with the learner. The next one is trauma and psychosocial support. So a lot of the learners, as we mentioned, or their parents are refugees and asylum seekers, meaning they've fled war, persecution, or displacement in their country. And when they come to the country, especially the first generation migrants, which would be their parents, they come and there's very limited support networks for them, right? So if we're in our country of origin, we have our grandparents, we have the community, everyone helping us. But for these learners, there might be a very limited support network. So they might rely on the schooling system, so the teachers, the counselors, the social workers, a bit more in that regard, right? So we're also seeing that there's a cultural shift between the parents and their children, as I mentioned, the identity differences. So that's also something to take into account. The parents usually come with the upbringing and the knowledge and the culture of their home country, and the learners have adapted and learned about South African culture and way of doing things, which is a lot more Western, and that can cause conflict. And I'll speak to that conflict a bit later on, but that is something to be mindful of when you have sessions with these learners or when you're advising them about their education journey. Okay. So the next thing, and this is really the crux of the support, this is the important aspect of the support, is providing bridging and placement support to the learners. So many of the online systems for universities and colleges are not very friendly towards those that don't hold a South African ID number. So when you try to enter the refugee or the asylum seeker permit number, it will not accept the number because it will say it's too short, right? Often these learners will have to submit their applications in person, or they'll have to go through alternative means because of this. So this can cause a lot of confusion for the learners. So it's always best to support them with these systems or contact the institution and find out about their processes. Just another thing to note is that quite often these learners are charged as international students. And this is something that they need to be aware of, that they are not supposed to be charged as international student rates just because of their documentation, right? So international students rates are for students that are applying from outside the country to come into South Africa to study here for those purposes. So refugees and asylum seekers that are in the country currently applying for tertiary education should be charged local rates, right? Most institutions, tertiary institutions have come around to this practice, but some are still not doing this. So it will just be good to inform the learner of this. Okay. Further than this, some learners might have obtained their high school certificate or degree in another country. And for that, they will need to apply to either SAQA or the USAF, which is University of South Africa, and SAQA is South African Qualifications Authority. Excuse me, Asaya, do you have a question?
I think he just came on, sorry, and had his mic
Okay.
unmuted. I couldn't get there in
Okay,
time.
perfect.
Thing.
So as I was mentioning, so learners that have a foreign qualification will have to apply for either SAQA or USAF prior to applying to their institution, right? So if they apply to USAF, they'll apply for matric exemption, for which they can either get a conditional exemption, mature age exemption, but that only applies after the age of 23, or they can get a foreign exemption, right? So those exemptions will depend on the country of origin, where they got the qualification, as well as their marks that they obtained, right? So it's best to do one-on-one consultations, because these are really handled on a case-by-case basis. And we at Scalabrini do support learners with this. Yeah. Sure. Sorry, I just see there's a question. Kufle will answer that quickly.
The question in the chat box is relating to a 14-year-old child who was born with a South African mother and the father's foreign national. For specific cases like this, it's always best to consult with us, because all things are handled case by case, as you said, Ryan. But I'll only just answer the end, because it relates to this. So can the questions be about the presentation, and then everything else we can speak about privately? My camera is off. Okay. All children, as I said, have the right to basic education, whether you are documented or undocumented. So the child should be able to go to school. There shouldn't be any issues with that. The child can go to school from grade R, or should be going to have been to school from grade R until matric, can write her finals and get her marks back. So there shouldn't be any issue with that. Mostly if schools aren't taking the child, you can go to the department and apply, or the district rather, and apply strictly from the district. But the child should be able to be getting an education, unless then the child is in school and then the child is being chased out of school, and then that's a separate issue which you need to consult with any of our intake with to give you assistance.
And if I'm not mistaken, there is also a circular
Yes.
about this access to basic education that perhaps we can share with
I'll look
you,
for the link.
Zoe, and or Kutle will share it in the chat now. So you can use that circular as well to approach the institution and show them, but this is what the law says about access. Okay, so just to continue with the academic placement support, so it's really important to have career guidance sessions with these learners as well. Often their perception or idea of what the world of work is and what is out there, what is possible, is quite limited due to the situation that they grew up in, or the things that they were exposed to in their everyday lives. So it's good to have a session with them, 1 or 2 sessions with them about the career options and how to explore the different ones. This will also bring up certain sectors which refugees and asylum seekers can't work in, or might find difficulty in working in, right? So one of those would be the legal sector. And Kutle will just explain that a bit better than I can. But there are restrictions when it comes to practicing law, if you are a refugee or asylum seeker. Another sector that might be quite challenging would be the nursing sector, right? So this is quite common for students or learners to be interested in that sector. But in our experience, it's quite difficult with the refugee or asylum documentation to apply to the nursing council and go through the application and registration process to be able to be a registered nurse, right? So just to have this conversation with the learner to make them aware of the difficulties that they might face so that they don't become despondent or complete an entire degree and then they are faced with these hurdles and challenges. Right. Kutha, do you just want to expand on the barriers to working in the space?
Okay, so the barriers it's quite short. You can get to LLB, but the only issue is that you can't practice the law if you're not a citizen. That is the law. If you don't have a citizen, I think maybe if you have PR, permanent residence, you can practice. But I'm certain that if you're not a citizen, you can't practice and you cannot be admitted. Then you can, there's other career options within law, but practicing is not a possibility. Also, the South African National Nursing Council, they require people or nurses to have a refugee status or PR. No, they want you to have permanent residence, and they won't register you if you do not have PR. Currently, I know that in the department we're engaging with SANG from last year because we've received a number of cases of people who finished their education but cannot register and cannot practice nursing. We were engaging with SANG, but we haven't reached a conclusion on that engagement. Yeah. Sure.
And then the last point on this is just to talk to the learners and identify the gaps early. So as I mentioned, there are bridging programs available at schools. There are extended degree programs available at schools. But sometimes learners might view this as not the full degree, right? Or the formal education. So to just have this conversation and set them at ease and explain why you advise that they apply for those programs, because they are quite helpful in transitioning from basic education to tertiary education. So the last barrier is probably the biggest barrier, and that is financial support. So there's two sides to this conversation. Quite often, so the first one would be quite often these learners might have to work part-time to also support the family. This is quite common that this is expected of the learner. And this might also be something that puts a lot of pressure on the child. What we see is that quite often the support from the household is there to go study, but also to bring in some income for the family. So that's why access to bursaries and scholarships is so important. But unfortunately, refugees and asylum seekers are excluded from a lot of bursaries. And the bursaries and scholarships that are available can be quite restrictive as well. So some are only open to refugees, some are only open to asylum seekers, and then others are only for postgrad studies, right? So most of the bursaries that are available are for postgrad education. There are some bursaries from the UNHCR, like the Daffy Foundation or Daffy Scholarship. There is the HCI Foundation in South Africa, which also supports scholarships. So there are scholarships available, but they can be quite restrictive. So the advice there would be to contact our center or contact another NGO that works in this space to give more advice on this, right? If a large one that might be useful to remember is the MasterCard Foundation. So the MasterCard Foundation works with quite a large number of universities across the country, and their applications are open to refugees and asylum seekers. But this would be, and most of this information can be found on the portal of the institution or going to the MasterCard Foundation's website. And then lastly, just to mention that UCT also has a bursary that's for international and refugee students, right? So that is another option that is available. We do have resources that we can share with clients, but initially we advise clients to come in, have a conversation with us, so that we can give them the best advice about which one to apply to, and also assist them with the application process. A lot of the international bursaries quite often have interviews and assessments that accompany the application process. So it's a good idea to prepare the learner for this ahead of time. So just a few of the support services. Obviously, Scalabrini Centre of Cape Town. We are in Cape Town, so that is the area that we serve. I've linked our website on this presentation. There's a lot of resources on our website for things like family joining, for documentation renewal, which can be accessed on our website. Another one for those that are calling in from Johannesburg or from the north of the country would be the Jesuit Refugee Services. So they also provide legal support, they provide documentation support, as well as skills programs, right? So they also have skills programs at the center. And then the last two are at in the Western Cape. So the one would be the Sozo Foundation. So they also mainly focus on skills development and entrepreneurship. And this might be a good alternative for learners that aren't ready to access tertiary education, whether that be due to funding or their marks and things like that. And then lastly, they also deal or assist with persons who want to redo their matric or to better their marks, right? So that's a good resource to have. And then Mamalani, also in the Western Cape, they assist with skills development programs towards employment, and they also assist with placement for child and youth care workers who are transitioning out of the center into adult housing and getting them set up and ready to make that transition. Okay. Cool. And then just to give a bit more background of what we do at the center. So we are in 47 Commercial Street in the heart of Cape Town. We're open 5 days a week, Monday to Friday for clients. Each program has their own client service hours, but we do provide advocacy support, as Gutle mentioned. So paralegal services, advising clients on how to renew their documentation or go about these things. We do provide well-being and development services. So this might be something that could be explored by the parents. So psychosocial support, well-being support for the refugees and asylum seekers. We do livelihoods or self-reliance pathways, and I'll speak a bit more about that later. And then we'll have a child care and protection unit as well, which also assists with disseminating information about birth registration. Yeah. So within the integration pathways program at Scalabrini, we have partnered with a university in the USA called Southern New Hampshire University and the Global Education Movement. So what this allows us to do is we've become a site partner for the university, meaning that we provide the resources, the coaches, and the support to the students, right? So learners that have a matric, whether that be from South Africa or any other country, documentation which allows them to live in South Africa, and they must be in Cape Town or the surrounding area, can apply for this scholarship, right? So the scholarship they apply for, and if they enter the program, they'll go through a 7-week bridging program, where we'll teach them academic English, we'll teach them computer literacy, and we'll teach them math as well. After these 7 weeks, they'll do a test and an interview, and if they pass, then they'll have the opportunity to join the Associates of Sciences program. So this is a equivalent to a national diploma. It's they have 2 years in which to complete this degree. It is self-paced and remote. Right, so the learners are required for the first 3 months of their program to come to the center thrice a week, and after that, if they've shown good academic progress and they are able to work remotely, then they are allowed to do so. Right. After these first, after they've completed their Associates of Science, they do have the option of applying for the bachelor's program, and if they apply for the bachelor's program, they can specialize in either logistics and operations, in healthcare management, or communications, with a main focus on business management across all 3 degrees. Right. So they are allowed another 2 years to complete the bachelor's degree program. I think this is a really good opportunity and another pathway to give to these learners, because the global education movement and Southern New Hampshire University provides a full scholarship for those that enter the associate's and the bachelor's degree programs, as long as they meet their academic requirements. Right. So there's very limited cost. There's 500 Rand for initial registration. After that, there's no cost to the learner, and they are also provided with travel stipend to come to the center to use the resources, engage with the coaches and the academic advisors as well. Right. So I'm sure this flyer was also shared with you. You're welcome to share these with your learners. Once they apply, they can use the link to apply, and once we have a good number of applications, we invite everyone to the center. So that process happens about every 3 months or so. So applications are always open, and there is no age restriction on this application. So if there are parents or those that have been out of school for quite some time that you would like to share this with, they are also welcome to apply. Okay, so the only age restriction would obviously be 18, right? So 18 and up.